It's 1865 in Virginia City, Montana, 4 in the morning. A Chinese woman named Ah Toy stands over a steaming washtub. Her hands are red and cracked from lye soap. Her back aches from hauling water. She'll work until midnight, and she's making more money than the gold miners she's washing clothes for. This is a story Hollywood never told you. A story about the women who actually built the American West, not with guns or cattle drives, but with washboards, irons, and business sense that would make a Wall Street banker jealous. Between 1850 and 1900, thousands of women carved out economic independence on the frontier, doing the one thing men desperately needed but refused to do themselves: laundry. They were businesswomen, and some of them became wealthy doing the hardest physical labor imaginable. This is their story. Let's start with a simple fact that changes everything you think you know about the frontier economy. In 1850s, California, during the height of the gold rush, a laundress could charge $8 to wash a dozen shirts. That's about 67 cents per shirt. 67 cents doesn't sound like much until you realize that in today's money, that's about $20 per shirt. A hard-working laundress might wash and iron 20 to 30 shirts in a day. That's $13 to $20 daily in modern currency. Over $300 to $600 a month. The miners working brutal 12-hour days in cold water, risking their health and lives. Most of them were making less than half that. The cowboys we've talked about in previous episodes, riding 1,000 miles and risking stampedes. They made $25 to $40 per month. A frontier laundress could earn comparable wages, sometimes more, than cowboys or miners. And here's what makes this even more remarkable. This was one of the only ways women could earn real money on the frontier. They couldn't vote. In most places, they couldn't own property if they were married. They had almost no legal rights. But they could wash clothes. And washing clothes could make them free. Who were these women? The women who dominated frontier laundry work came from everywhere, but 3 groups stood out. First, there were the Chinese immigrants. In California mining towns, Chinese laundries became so common that Chinese laundry became almost a single word. Men like Ah Foon and women like Ah Toy built entire businesses on the backs of this work. They faced extraordinary prejudice. Special taxes targeted Chinese businesses specifically. The foreign miners' tax in California charged Chinese miners $20 per month, but Chinese launderers often paid similar discriminatory fees. Violence against Chinese businesses was common, with laundries burned, workers beaten, entire communities driven out of towns. The first Chinese laundry in San Francisco opened in 1851, run by a man named Hua Li. His sign read simply, "Washing and Ironing." Within 30 years, Chinese immigrants operated 2/3 of all laundries in San Francisco. Chinese launderers worked 18 to 20-hour days. They lived in the back rooms of their shops, sleeping on wooden planks, saving every penny. They had little choice but to work themselves to exhaustion. Yet they persisted, because the economics made sense. A Chinese immigrant could arrive with nothing and, within a few years of brutal labor, own property, send money home to family, or finance bringing relatives to America. The laundry business was a foothold, a beginning. Second, there were African American women. Many were formerly enslaved people who'd made their way west seeking opportunity. Women like Clara Brown, who was born enslaved in Virginia around 1800, freed in Kentucky in 1856 at the age of 56, and then worked her way to Colorado, where she became a laundress in mining camps. Clara's story is remarkable not just for her success, but for her resilience. Her family had been torn apart by slavery. Her husband Richard and daughter Margaret had died. Her son Richard had been sold so many times he was untraceable. Only her daughter Eliza Jane might still be alive, somewhere. Clara spent decades searching while she built her laundry business. She hired literate friends to write letters. She traveled when she could. In 1882, at age 82, she finally found Eliza Jane living in Council Bluffs, Iowa. They reunited after 47 years of separation. By the time Clara Brown died in 1885, she owned property throughout Colorado, had financed the freedom and relocation of 16 formerly enslaved people, and was called Aunt Clara by an entire town that mourned her passing. The Central City Opera House flew its flag at half-mast. Colorado's governor attended her funeral. She did it all washing miners' clothes. For black women in the post-Civil War West, laundry work represented both opportunity and limitation. They could earn real money, they could own property, they could support their families and communities. But they were still constrained by racism, by laws that denied them full citizenship, by violence that could erupt at any moment. Black laundresses often became community anchors. They tended the sick, they delivered babies, they organized churches and schools. The money they earned washing clothes funded institutions that would serve their communities for generations. Third, there were white women, often widows or women who'd been abandoned. The frontier had a way of creating widows. Accidents, disease, violence, men died young and often. Mine accidents, stagecoach robberies, simple infections that became sepsis. The women left behind had to survive. In a society that offered women almost no respectable work options, laundry was acceptable. Hard, yes. Backbreaking, absolutely. But acceptable in a way that other work wasn't. A widow with children couldn't work in a saloon, couldn't deal cards in a gambling hall. But she could take in washing, she could work from home, she could maintain respectability while earning money. White laundresses often charged less than Chinese laundries because they lacked the business networks and pooled resources that Chinese immigrants created. They worked alone, without the community support systems that helped other groups survive. Some formed informal cooperatives, one woman washing, another ironing, a third handling delivery. What united all these women, regardless of race or background, was simple. They recognized an opportunity. Frontier towns had ratios of men to women that were sometimes 20-1, 50-1, even higher in mining camps. Those men needed clean clothes, they had money, and they had no idea how to wash anything. Miners would throw away shirts rather than wash them. They'd walk around in clothes so stiff with dirt and sweat they could stand up on their own. Contemporary accounts describe miners whose clothes were caked with mud, sweat, and tobacco juice. Into this environment came women who saw past the dirt to the opportunity. The women who saw this weren't dreamers. They were economists. A day in the life. Let's walk through what it actually took to run a frontier laundry business. Because when I tell you this was brutal work, I mean brutal in ways that are hard to comprehend in our modern world of washing machines. It starts before dawn, maybe 4 in the morning, maybe earlier if you have a large order. First, you need water, lots of water. A single load of laundry might require 30 to 50 gallons. In some mining towns, water cost money, 10 cents a bucket, sometimes more. In other places, you hauled it yourself from a river or creek, carrying heavy wooden buckets hundreds of yards. Next, you heat the water. This means fires, wood fires in iron stoves or open pits. In summer, you're standing over boiling water in 100-degree heat. In winter, your hands go numb carrying water that freezes in the bucket. The soap is lye-based. If you're making your own, and many women did, you're combining animal fat with lye, created from wood ash. This stuff is caustic. It burns skin. Over time, it permanently damages hands, leaving them red, cracked, scarred. Now you scrub. Washboards weren't gentle corrugated surfaces. They were rough metal or wood that you dragged clothes across with force. Hours and hours of scrubbing. Your knuckles bleed. Your back screams. The lye soap burns every cut on your hands. After scrubbing comes rinsing, more water to haul, more heating. Then, wringing out the clothes by hand. Heavy, waterlogged fabric twisted with all the strength you can muster. Then comes ironing. But not with modern electric irons. These were cast iron weights, 7 to 9 pounds each. heated on stoves until they were almost too hot to hold. You'd have multiple irons heating. When one cooled, you'd grab the next hot one from the stove. And the ironing had to be perfect. A miner might accept a slightly gray shirt, but wrinkles? Unacceptable. These men were paying premium prices. They wanted their clothes to look good. By the end of the day, often midnight or later, you've washed, dried, and ironed anywhere from 20 to 40 pieces. You've hauled hundreds of gallons of water. You've stood over fire for 16 to 18 hours, and tomorrow you'll do it again. But here's what made it worth it. At the end of the week, you had money, real money, money that belonged to you. In an era when married women couldn't legally own property in most states, when a woman's economic options were essentially marriage or destitution, laundry money meant freedom, the business side. What separated the women who merely survived from the women who thrived was business sense. Some laundresses charged by the piece, 67 cents for a shirt, 25 cents for socks, $1 for a full suit. This was straightforward, but meant your income was directly tied to how many hours you could physically work. Smarter businesswomen realized they could expand beyond their own labor. They hired other women, paying them wages while taking a percentage. This was frontier capitalism at its most basic and most effective. Some women transitioned from laundry to boarding houses, because if you're already washing clothes and you have the space, why not also feed the miners? A boarding house could charge $1 a day for room and board. 20 residents meant $30 a day, $900 a month. The business model was elegant. Boarders generated steady income. Their laundry was guaranteed business, and if you served good meals, word spread. The most successful frontier businesswomen ran hybrid operations: laundry, boarding, sometimes cooking or baking on the side. They diversified their income streams the way modern entrepreneurs are taught to do in business school. Take Mary Ellen Pleasant. Born enslaved, she made her way to San Francisco during the gold rush. She started with laundry and boarding, saved her money, and began investing in real estate and business ventures. Here's what made Pleasant brilliant. She worked as a domestic servant in wealthy homes even after she had money. Wealthy men talked business over dinner. They discussed investments, opportunities, insider information. Pleasant, serving their meals, heard everything. She invested based on what she heard: gold mines, silver claims, real estate in downtown San Francisco, Wells Fargo stock, the Bank of California. By the 1870s, she partnered with Thomas Bell, a white banker. They put investments in his name to avoid discrimination. Together, they built a fortune estimated at $30 million, nearly $1 billion in today's money. Mary Ellen Pleasant, who started by washing shirts, became one of the wealthiest women in California. She used her fortune to fund the Underground Railroad, support formerly enslaved people relocating west, and fight segregation. Or consider Biddy Mason. Born enslaved, she walked 1,700 miles behind her owner's wagon train, literally walked, herding cattle, caring for her 3 daughters. After winning her freedom in court in 1856, she worked as a nurse and midwife in Los Angeles. She saved every penny. In 1866, she bought 2 lots in Los Angeles for $250. That was 10 years' savings. Biddy built small rental houses. She collected rent, she saved, she bought more land. As Los Angeles grew, her property became downtown real estate. By the time she died in 1891, Biddy Mason owned property worth $300,000, about $6 million today. She'd used that wealth to found the first African Methodist Episcopal Church in Los Angeles and create a daycare for working mothers. She'd started by washing clothes and delivering babies. The Chinese laundries developed particularly sophisticated business models. They operated on credit systems, extending trust to miners who might not pay for weeks. They networked with other Chinese businesses, creating financial networks that protected them when white-owned banks refused them service. In many towns, the Chinese laundry was also an informal bank, money transfer service, and community center. It was economic infrastructure that served a community excluded from the mainstream economy. the dangers, and the discrimination. But let's be clear, this wasn't some romantic tale of opportunity. The work destroyed bodies, the discrimination destroyed spirits, and the violence was real. Chinese laundries faced constant attacks. In 1871, a mob in Los Angeles killed 18 Chinese residents and burned their businesses. In 1885, white workers massacred 28 Chinese miners in Rock Springs, Wyoming, and burned 78 Chinese homes. Chinese laundries were frequent targets because they represented economic success that threatened white workers. Cities passed laws specifically targeting Chinese laundries. San Francisco's Cubic Air Ordinance of 1870 required 500 cubic feet of air per person in sleeping quarters, a requirement only Chinese laundries and boarding houses couldn't meet. The Laundry Ordinance of 1873 required laundries to pay licensing fees based on whether they used horse-drawn wagons. Chinese laundries that delivered on foot paid the highest fees. These laws had one purpose: economic warfare. Black laundresses faced different but equally destructive discrimination. They could rarely rent commercial space. They worked from home, often in one or two rooms where they also lived with their families. The work environment was therefore even more oppressive. Sleeping where you work, never escaping the smell of lye and smoke. White laundresses weren't immune either. A woman working alone was vulnerable to harassment, assault, theft. Physical toll was the same regardless of race. Hands permanently damaged, backs ruined, lungs scarred from years of inhaling steam and smoke. And then there was the social stigma. In many frontier towns, laundresses occupied an ambiguous social position. They worked with their hands. They worked with men's intimate clothing. They were in business, which respectable women weren't supposed to be. Some towns tried to blur the line deliberately. In Deadwood and other mining camps, some brothel owners called their establishments laundries as a euphemism. This damaged the reputation of legitimate laundresses who were simply trying to earn an honest living. The technology that changed everything. By the 1890s, things were changing. Technology was catching up to the frontier, and it would eventually end the golden age of the frontier laundress. The first washing machines began appearing in the 1850s, but they were expensive, unreliable, and required significant setup. They were essentially barrels with agitators that you cranked by hand, not much easier than scrubbing on a washboard. But by the 1870s and 1880s, improved designs were spreading. Steam-powered commercial laundries opened in San Francisco, Denver, and other large frontier cities. These operations could process hundreds of pounds of laundry per day, undercutting the prices individual laundresses could charge. The economics that had made individual laundresses wealthy began to shift. Mechanization favored capital over labor. If you had money to invest in equipment, you could compete. If you were a single woman with a washboard and determination, you were being priced out. By 1900, the frontier laundress as a path to wealth was largely over. It persisted in remote areas, in small towns, but the opportunity had closed. But the legacy remained. The property purchased with laundry money. The families brought west with laundry savings. The communities built by laundry networks. The next generation educated with laundry income. Clara Brown's laundry money had funded an entire migration of formerly enslaved people to Colorado. Mary Ellen Pleasant's laundry business had seeded investments that made her one of the wealthiest women in California. Hundreds of Chinese immigrants had used laundry income to bring family members to America, creating communities that persist today. The work had been brutal. The discrimination had been real. The physical cost had been enormous. But for a few decades, in the brief window when the frontier economy created unusual opportunities, and before mechanization closed them, washing clothes had been a path to something that women rarely had in 19th century America: economic independence. Today, if you visit museums in Virginia City, Deadwood, or Sacramento, you'll occasionally find exhibits about frontier laundresses. A washboard here, a cast iron pressing iron there, maybe a photograph of Chinese men standing in front of a laundry. But photographs of the women themselves are rare. Women's work, especially work done by immigrant and black women, wasn't considered worthy of documentation. What survives are the records they left behind: property deeds, business licenses, probate records showing wealth accumulated. In Oakland, California, there's a historical marker for Mary Ellen Pleasant. In Denver, Clara Brown is remembered with a chair in the state capitol building and a stained glass window. In San Francisco, historical tours sometimes mention the Chinese laundries that once dominated certain neighborhoods, but mostly these women have been forgotten. The clothes they washed have long since turned to dust. The buildings where they worked have been torn down. The water they hauled has flowed to the ocean. What remains is this: the American West wasn't built by gunfighters and cowboys alone. It was built by people willing to do hard work, backbreaking, unglamorous, brutal work. And some of the hardest work of all was done by women standing over steaming washtubs at 4 in the morning, hands red and cracked, backs aching, knowing that every shirt they scrubbed was another step toward freedom. They weren't heroes in the traditional sense. They didn't shoot outlaws or tame wild horses. They didn't even get their names in the history books most of the time. They just washed clothes. But washing clothes built communities. Washing clothes educated children. Washing clothes purchased property that would be passed down through generations. Washing clothes meant survival, independence, and sometimes even wealth. The next time you think about the American frontier, remember this: while the cowboys were driving cattle and the miners were digging for gold, women were building the real economy of the West, one shirt at a time, with hands that would never fully heal and determination that would change everything.